I manage 20 Airbnb properties across the UK and the UAE, and I don't own a single one of them. And every single one of these properties are making me over £1,000 of clean profit every single month. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact model that makes this possible, show you step by step how to get it set up properly, and talk about the risks that most people don't talk about online. If you've ever thought about starting an Airbnb business, but thought you need to buy a property to actually get going, this is a video that'll change that. So at its core, rent-to-rent is exactly what it sounds like. You rent a property from a landlord on a long-term lease, typically 3 to 5 years, and then we re-rent it out on a short-term basis to our clients on Airbnb and Booking.com. And using this strategy, you operate it in a way that more money comes in than it goes out. So obviously you have to pay the rent, the bills, and all of the other expenses that come with it. Because we're renting it on a short-term basis, we can capitalize on tourism, contractors, and various other markets that require short-term accommodation. And therefore, we can charge a premium on a nightly rate rather than charging on a long-term basis and making minimal profit. The main thing I want you to understand from this video is that you don't own the property, you control it. And that's why this business model is so attractive to beginners or somebody just wanting to get started in property, because you don't need a massive mortgage or a loan from the bank to actually get involved. All you need is about 3 to 5K to get up and running using this business model. And before you say it, it's not illegal. There's big companies doing this many years. This business model, whether you call it rent-to-rent, arbitrage, it's as old as time, and it's used in many different ways in different businesses. For example, big hotel chains like the Hilton, they don't own the buildings. They rent the buildings and then re-rent the rooms on a nightly basis. It makes a lot more sense for cash flow. If you imagine massive hotel operators having to purchase huge buildings with upfront costs of millions and then having to renovate it and do it all up to be able to accommodate guests on a short-term basis, doesn't make any sense for cash flow. They use this exact business model. Some of the most well-known brands in business don't own the buildings that they use on a daily basis to operate their business. The difference is we're just using it for short-term accommodation. So I'm going to draw a simple diagram to show you exactly the flow of how this business model works. So we'll start with the landlord. And then go to us as the business operators, and then it goes to our guests. So you'll reach out to landlords, get their permission to use the property as a short-term let. You'll acquire the property, set it up, stage it so it's ready for guests, and then the flow of the property then goes to the guests. They stay in the property on a short-term basis. That's as simple as it gets. So let's break down the real numbers involved in taking on a rent-to-rent deal. So we take on a property, let's say property costs us £800 and rent every single month to the landlord. That's a fixed cost. That's what we have to pay the landlord every single month without fail. Good property in a good area, strong demand, well positioned, good photography. It's going to generate anywhere from 2 to 3K a month in revenue. So that one property is going to generate us 2 to 3K per month. Now, out of that revenue, you're going to have costs. You're going to have cleaning costs, maintenance costs, your PMS, any software costs, utilities. That all needs to be factored in. They are variable costs, but once you start to understand the processes, you start to bring them down and they become more predictable. But let's say at the end of the month, we have about £800 in costs, right? So here's our costs down here. Costs are about £800. That means we have £1,600 to pay out to the landlord. If I'm making 2K, it's £400 profit, but I think we can make 3K. That's £1,400 profit. Depending on the time of year, the month, how strong the demand is, if I'm making 2K, it's not a great deal. Making £400 profit, not great. Let's just say we have 2K minus 1.6K, that equals £400 of profit. Not the best deal. Probably something you'd expect in a slower season, maybe the winter months, January, after everyone spent their money during the Christmas period, you might only make something like £400. Not the end of the world. But when we're looking at 3K revenue, it's a very different story. 3K, that is now £1,400 profit. And I can tell you from experience, this is extremely realistic. In the summer months in the UK, you're definitely going to be pulling in more than £3,000 in revenue every single month. When we take a back step and we look at this from a different angle, you can see why it's extremely attractive. It's a really attractive model, because let's say you invested in this property, £800 first month's rent, £800 deposit, you're £1,600 now. Probably came furnished, so you probably don't have to furnish it much, do some light staging. Let's say your initial investment is 2 to 2.5k. Essentially, if you're making this profit, you've already got your return on investment back within 2 months, and now you're in a clean profit stage. Tell me anywhere else you're gonna get that return on investment that quick. I'd say most investments that are strong yields and a good ROI, you're looking at 5 to 10 years to get your return on investment. This strategy works. And like I said, you can see why it's becoming extremely attractive for people just starting out. Now, I know what some of you are gonna be thinking, is this even legal? I get this question all of the time. I'll be completely upfront because this is one of the most important things that you need to get right. Can rent be done illegally? Absolutely. If that is not in writing and in contract, and both you and the landlord are aware that it's actually taking place, it's completely illegal, and you can be taken to court and fined for doing this. That's why it's essential to make sure the landlord is on board, he knows exactly what you're doing, and there's a legally binding contract in place to protect you and the landlord. This is where all the horror stories come from. When people do it illegally, they do it behind the landlord's back, and this is why it gets such a bad rep at times. You'll see people on Instagram saying, this is completely illegal, you can't do this, etc., etc. It's not illegal if done with the landlord's permission. It's as simple as. Think about it like this. If a landlord owns a property, who can legally stop him from saying that another person can sublet that property? There's no international law in place that stops somebody from subletting a property with the landlord's permission. None that I know of anyways. What you need in place is a corporate let agreement. This is different than a regular AST contract. You'll have this in place with a landlord, which states very clearly the legal rights of you and the landlord, and it will have clauses that says you are allowed to use this as a short-term let, and you can put it on platforms such as Airbnb and Booking.com with the landlord's permission. It's signed by both you and the landlord, and it's legally binding. So if anything was to come back on you, you have a legally binding contract and you're protected in all cases. If you don't get this part right, you're building on sand. You're not going to be able to create a scalable business, and you could potentially face legal action. If you get it right, you have a real business with real legal standing. So just to reiterate, corporate let agreement, equals legal. No agreement is completely illegal, and you can face serious problems as a result of that, which you don't want to be doing. You don't want to be starting off a business illegally and having to watch over your shoulder to make sure you don't get taken to court or face fines from the landlord. And also, you just tarnish your reputation. You'll never be able to actually do the business in the future if you get a bad name for yourself. Here's the 5 steps to doing rent properly. Step 1, research your market properly. Before you call a single landlord, before you even take on any property, you need to look at the areas that you actually want to operate in. Look at the numbers. Why do you want to operate there? Is it based on emotion or is it based on data? Then we need to look at what are other comparable properties renting for on short term in the area. What's their ADR? What's their occupancy? What's their RevPAR? All of these factors are going to be essential in determining whether this area is going to be worthwhile or just a flop. Another thing that I'd look at is, what is the demand like in the area? What's the regulations like in the area? Is there many landlords that actually allow this business model? These are all really important factors to consider before you even make one call to a landlord. A strategy that works well in one area can fall flat in another. You're not guessing here, you're checking whether this is actually valid. But this is where most people fail. They don't do their due diligence, they don't do proper market research, and they just take on blind deals. And that's where they start losing money, getting rid of units, breaking leases on contracts, and blaming others for their lack of research. So the next step is rules and structure. This is probably the boring part that everyone wants to avoid, but it will save you so much money and headache down the line if you do this correctly. Before you take on any property in an area, you need to understand the local regulations that are applied to that area. For example, in Leeds, there's no local regulations preventing short-term rentals. But in London, there's a 90-day rule, which is tricky to understand if you're only new to the business. As I said, it's probably boring to understand all these rules, regulations, but it'll save you so much headache, especially if you were to take on a deal and realize down the line the business model doesn't work or there's restrictions allowing you to actually operate freely. As I said previously, you can't just rent the property on a standard AST and then run it as a short-term let without the landlord's permission. If you do this, you'll face legal action. The paperwork has to match the use. Once you have a corporate let agreement in place, you're good to go. And what I always say to students and people that ask me this question, if the structure isn't clean, if it's not straightforward, and doesn't tick the boxes that I would show them, walk away from the deal. There's so many more deals out there that won't require a headache and jumping through hoops to actually operate the unit as a short-term rental. The next step is one of the most important, in my opinion. This is where the deal is made or broken. Number 3, finding the right properties. As I said, this is where the deals are made or broken. Once you've ran the numbers, you understand the local rules and regulations, you're ready to start sourcing deals. The key here is not looking for perfection. We're not looking for the most glamorous, best property on the market, because more than likely it'll be extremely high rent, or the landlord might be a bit picky, in my experience. A good way to source deals when you're just getting started out in the business is looking for leverage. So looking for properties that are sitting on the market vacant for weeks and even months is a very good entry point to get your first deal. Or even landlords that are struggling with tenants. Tenants aren't paying rent on time. All of these pain points you can use as leverage to get a deal across the line with a landlord. You have to look at these as opportunities. You're solving a problem for a landlord. You're not asking for a favor. By this stage, you should have a short list of properties that you've maybe reached out to or you're going to reach out to that fit your criteria and make sense financially. So the next step is step number 4, having the correct conversations. It's all about positioning yourself to speak to a landlord correctly. Once you get on the phone to a landlord, you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, you're about business, you're not just some random guy that wants to rent a property and put it on Airbnb. That's the last thing a landlord wants to hear when he's getting a call from someone. And this is where people lose the deal. If you ring up a landlord and say, "Hi, I want to Airbnb a property," there is no chance you get any deal closed with that pitch. It's as simple as. They're going to say no immediately and maybe even block your number. What you need to do is explain who you are, explain your company, the business model, how it works, and then from there have a conversation. What I say to people all the time is that this person is just another human. All you need to do is have a conversation with them. Be professional, be concise, know what you're actually speaking about, and be able to navigate the conversation to either a viewing or closing the deal. That's how it works. But don't be scared on the phone or robotic like you're reading the script word for word. The landlord will be able to smell this from a mile away, and they won't give you that property. What you're doing on the call is you're selling professionalism, care, and certainty. And that's what landlords actually care about. They need to trust you before they hand over the keys of one of their properties. And that's all about how you position yourself on the call and eventually in person when you're pitching. It's not about how excited you are and what perfect script you read off a piece of paper. It's all about how you position yourself. And the final step is step 5, contracts plus systems. This is extremely important. Every single deal needs a corporate let agreement in place with clear responsibilities, terms, and break clauses. If the landlord won't allow these terms or doesn't allow a break clause, that's usually a red flag and I'll probably review the situation or walk away immediately. What I always tell people is good deals don't need pressure. There might be a bit of back and forward, there might be a bit of negotiation, but it doesn't require extreme pressure or so much headache to get the deal done. It's very simple once done correctly. And before the keys even land in your hand, you need to have the systems ready so you can onboard and get going from day one. Get your listings up, get your photography and staging done, get your Airbnb and Booking.com listings live and ready to take bookings. Get all the softwares that you're going to be using, your PMS, your task lists, get a cleaning and maintenance team ready to go, and have your dynamic pricing software hooked up so you're ready to take bookings immediately. The goal is to create systems from the get-go so it doesn't become a second job. It doesn't become another headache and nuisance in your life that stresses you out day in, day out. If you don't systemize this early on, you will burn out. I guarantee it. And I'm saying this from experience because I've been there. I was the guy that was trying to do everything all at once by myself. Once I started implementing the correct systems, and I was forced to because I was on the other side of the world. When I had my first unit in Dubai and I was running things remotely from Ireland, I was forced to systemize or else I would have completely failed. So systemize early, build a team, build softwares, automations, everything to make your life that much easier. Let me be honest about the real risks involved in this business, because if I'm not real, you're going to find out the hard way, like me. Some of the real risks are taking on a property you can't fill, overestimating the demand in a property that you didn't research properly, accepting a contract with no break clause just because you were excited to get your first deal. I'd say one of the biggest risks is poor guest screening. Not vetting guests properly can be extremely damaging, not only your property, but your business and reputation. And lastly, having those systems in place so the whole business relies on you. If you go to sleep, the business can't run by itself. The worst situation in this business model isn't low profit. It's being stuck paying rent on a property that doesn't perform and not bringing in the numbers that you want. The worst situation in this business model is not low profits. It's being stuck paying rent on a property that doesn't perform well. That's why proper market research, deal analysis, and due diligence is extremely important at the starting phase of this business. If you skip this, you have no chance. Rent to rent isn't magic. It's not easy and it's not for everybody. But when it's done correctly, with the right research, the right structure, and the right systems, it's one of the most accessible ways to generate cash flow from properties that you don't even own. If you want to see the next step, I've made a video showing the exact script that I use when I call landlords. I've linked it below in the comment section. It's a natural next step after watching this video. Subscribe to the channel if you found this video useful, as I break down Airbnb videos every single week. No fluff, just clarity.